Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
It was so clear to me, and it had never been more clear in my life until I went to the canyon, that the planet is very small, and we need each other. Like, all people need each other, and we're all we have for each other. And if we're not here for each other, then what are we doing?
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens, episode 129. Yep, keep bumping along. We love it. We love that you're here, so thanks for listening. Today's episode is one of those crossover episodes, not really about adventure racing, but kind of about adventure racing. And when you listen, you'll hear about the Korima Health Initiative, a work of good people. Adventure racers are involved. You'll hear some familiar names who do work in the Copper Canyon in Mexico. You may have read Born to Run. This is the same area, and that book comes up during our interview today. And so we are delighted that you are here. That grunting that you're hearing in the background, that tapping, is the adventure dog who has her stuffy in her mouth and wants to go outside. So I will keep this short. Thanks for listening. Thanks for giving KHI your time and your ears. And be sure to check out the show notes for all the links. Okay, so Poppy, I think it's time to go for a walk. Everybody else, sit back and enjoy this episode of The Dark Zone. As listeners of the show know, we spend a lot of time talking to adventure racers, racing, the courses they cover, the races they direct, things that they experience. But we like from time to time to talk to the people who adventure, who are involved in adventures that are necessarily outside of adventure racing. Sometimes there's a crossover in between the two. And there's a bit of that here on this call today. We are delighted to have 5 members, the core group of the Korima Health Initiative. They work in Mexico, and we have them all on the call. And I'm going to give all their names now because there's some names you'll be familiar with, listeners. And then I'm going to kick it over to one of them to introduce the Health Initiative to us and what that means. So we have Sherry Himes, and if you've adventure raced, you know exactly who Sherry is. We have Chris Martinez, Jen Henry, Anya Villalobos, and we have George Wortley. So there's some adventure racing experience on the call, but there's a lot of good works on the call. So Anna, everybody, thank you for being here. We're going to start with you, Anna. Tell us about the Korima Health Initiative.
Cuida va. This is high in Rarámuri. And Korima Health Initiative, you are looking at them. We are a group of doctors and volunteers who this year we actually decided to come up with a group to look or to get fundings for a clinic that is already there. The building is already there, but we're starting from zero in terms of medicine, beds, getting personnel in the canyon. There is a clinic nearby, which is called Samachique, but we are like deeper in the canyon.
When you say the canyon, talk to me about geographically the Copper Canyon, which is in Mexico.
Correct. It's in the northern part of Mexico.
And if I understand correctly, that culture, that part of the world was made famous for their long distance running. That's very often how Cabela Blanco, right? And that's how most North Americans have learned about that part of the country through those books and through that. That's geographically where you are located.
Exactly.
And inside there, who do you work with there?
So we are all here together because of Tomás Bencomo. He is the main visionary guy who just has been dedicated. He's dedicated all his life to the Rarámuri people. And that's what Rarámuri means, by the way. It means Lightfoot.
And they're very light of foot, by the way, because I've seen them race. I've seen them run.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
And so from the work of Tomas's work, you are the downstream impact of his work. Like you are generationally, you're following him into the work.
You got it. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. He has already, and it's a boarding school / orphanage. And he boards about like 80, 90 kids and he will take care of everything. I mean, education, breakfast, lunch, dinner. So he's already taking part of that. And the clinic, we are coming in to support that.
If not for your work, and Sherry, I'll kick this over to you. If not for your work, who would be filling this need, or is it you? Are there no other services available in this area?
Well, I've gone to the canyon about 4 times, and I've learned a lot about it from Doc George Wortley, who I do know from adventure racing. He was the Odyssey adventure racing doc for many years, and that's how I got invited. And the impression I'm under, I'm not really sure of the answer. Anna and Doc will be better known, to know that. But there are little communities throughout the canyon, and they sometimes are staffed, sometimes they're not. And I do know that there is a Canadian team that has come
correct.
Down, and a medical Canadian team. They love the canyon too. It's a special invite. Not just anyone can come. And the Tarahumara, the Rarámuri are very, very shy people, and you have to have a special way to get in there to help them. They're very modest and very, they're I don't know, for lack of a better word, they're just a shy people, and very
obviously,
proud.
too, you want to be thoughtful about when you're bringing services in any culture. You have to begin with the respect of that culture.
Exactly.
Right? That's where it starts, right?
Yeah. I mean, we go under with Tomas and Brenda, who's another woman who is with the ministry. And that's how we go into the canyon and go in there safely and bring all our supplies. And they arrange for us to either go into certain villages, or these people will walk 50, 60, 70 miles to us. And there'll be runners that will go to different villages and say them, the doctors are here, El Doctoro, and they'll come, and get help. And we treat all kinds of things. So.
Yeah, and you referenced we have George Wortley on the call. George and I were emailing back and forth before we had this. And George, by the way, will be back on for his own dedicated adventure racing episode, because
so excited.
The email alone was great. So those of you who are licking their chops, George will be back by himself for an episode, and George, you and I will put that together. Mm-hmm. But clearly, George, you've been deeply involved in this work in the canyon. Talk to us a bit about it. What have you learned from it? What have you done down there?
Okay, let me just give you a little bit of background on what I've done. I've been going there now for about 27 years, and probably made 30 plus trips. And it all goes back to the mid-1990s. In the mid-90s, there were 4 years of drought where the rain did not come at the right time, so the crops failed. And when you're a Tarahumara living in Copper Canyon, your only source of food is what you grow. And it really was a desperate famine. Infant mortality was in excess of 90%, meaning 9 out of 10 babies did not survive their first year of life. And a friend of mine, Ray Buchanan, was starting a hunger relief organization then called Stop Hunger Now. And he went to one of the hunger meetings, and they were talking about this famine in Copper Canyon with the Tarahumara, and how there wasn't anyone doing anything. The Mexican government wasn't doing much. Plus, they couldn't really get into the canyon because there's no roads. And the Tarahumara really want very little to do with the outside world. They've gotten the short end of the stick ever since the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s. Mm-hmm. But then Ray learned at this meeting there was this minister in Juarez named Tomas Bencomo, who had gone down and walked the canyon with his mule and food, and had made contact with the people and was starting to do things. So Ray set out for Juarez to find Tomas, found him, and when Ray came back, he said, "George, I've been to the most amazing place. You got to go back there with me." And right away, I could think of about a dozen reasons why I should not do this. Like, I don't speak Spanish. I've never been to Mexico. I don't have a passport. I've never done any medical relief work, and these were missionaries, and I'm not all that religious of a person, So about 4 months later, I found myself in a dusty pickup truck with Ray Buchanan heading into Copper Canyon.
Let me pause you for a second for our audience. It's not uncommon for an adventure racer to be wholly unprepared for something and still try it. So you had the right attitude going into it.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where you know all the reasons you shouldn't do it, but you do it, and you're darn glad you did it.
Right.
It was an adventure, and it was just kind of love at first sight. I loved the people. I felt very safe there with Tomas and his group. I mean, we're in a very wild place. Some of it's even kind of controlled by drug cartels, but I've always felt safe, and I've been there probably 30 plus times, and heck, I keep coming back. And that's when I started going at least once a year, if not twice a year. And actually, the roots of all this does kind of go back to adventure racing and ultra distance trail runs. I started through David. I don't know if you ever heard of David Horton, the ultra distance runner, the first American to finish the Barkley. I crewed David 3 times at the Barkley, unsuccessful attempts. So I started covering David's races, and at the finish line, this would have been about 1996 or so, when the Eco Challenge was first starting on TV. I heard this guy talking at the finish line that he was going to start an adventure race here on the East Coast called the Beast of the East. And I said, hey, that sounds interesting. If you need any help, let me know. And that winter, that was Don Mann, Odyssey Adventure Racing. And that's where it started. And that's where I met Sherry. I met Jen through ultra distance trail running. She's done a lot of long races. I met Anna. My day job, I was a faculty member in a family medicine training program. And Anna did her residency training in Lynchburg, and I would always bring residents and medical students with me to Mexico. And Anna kind of fell in love with the place too, and has been coming back ever since. Once I retired from residency, my day job for nearly 30 years, I took a job with the U.S. Antarctic program, and I've had 3 deployments to Antarctica, including a winter and a summer at the South Pole. And that's where I met Chris. So it's been a real eclectic group between ultra distance trail racing, adventure racing, medical education, and the South Pole. And, I've brought people from all those places.
This may be the coolest interview I've ever done, because there's 5 people who've done amazing things on this, and you've all circled around your work in the canyon, which is amazing there. Mickey, we have Chris here. Chris, your name was just referenced, so we'll go to you. How did you get involved in all of this?
So I met George my first trip down to South Pole. I'd already done a few deployments in Antarctica, and I was kind of on a mission to fix the clinics, make them a little bit more efficient. It's pretty extreme down there, so anything we can do to make it safer and have better outcomes. And George was great. He'd already been to South Pole. I was replacing him. He taught me a lot, and he said, hey, when you get off the ice, you should come down to Mexico to Copper Canyon and, do some medical mission work.
He planted the seed. Oh, by the way.
He did.
He slipped it in there. Right.
Oh, he did. And I've done third world medicine. I was in the military for many, many years. And several of my deployments were non-combat and actually, going to do relief work or set up clinics and, third world countries, Africa. And so I really enjoyed it. And so I'm like, okay, I'll go. And so the first year I was supposed to go, 2 weeks before we were leaving, he calls me and I'm like, oh yeah, good to go. And the next day I had a climbing injury, injured my eye, and I couldn't go. So last year I was very safe, stopped climbing a month before the trip, basically, took it easy and then went down. And it was a very rewarding, amazing experience, to see these people just, living their life, their culture, not really wanting anything except, a little bit of assistance so they can just, keep on living their lives, separate from us. But I started looking around, I'm like, if we did this or we did that, I can't help myself trying to make things more efficient.
Right.
And so we all talked. We saw a lot of patients. My first patient was actually a 9-year-old boy who walked about 10 miles by himself with this injury through his face, into his eye, no parents. And he just wanted to, and we took care of him. And on the drive back, we were all talking about what an amazing experience was. And that's kind of where the foundation for coming up with KHI is. We had a long drive back to the border, and we had a lot of time to talk about it and, ways we could better, help the Tarahumara. And so that's kind of how I got roped into it and how we all kind of, formed the Brady Bunch and came up with the KHI.
Got it. And Jen, how about you, Jen? How did you get pulled into this?
The best way, ultra running. I met David Horton. First got married. I didn't realize what being married to an ultra runner was going to entail. And I met David Horton in 2002 when my husband had asked me to crew him and 20 random people to run the entire Tuscarora Trail over 6 days. And so we have a long history with David Horton. And so David Horton went down with George a couple of times, right, George? Like two times at least. And so when I heard about that, and I started going to David's races because, like I said, he's a good buddy. My husband has run all of his races. He's one of 5 that have run all of his Hell Gates. And so I heard, this bat call from David Horton. He sends bat calls up and down the AT. I live really close to the Appalachian Trail. And whenever there's somebody coming through for an FKT, David calls me and I'll help support them, whatever. If there's some folks that are section hiking, George has done, I'm not sure if have you got the whole AT, George?
Oh, I've only got 1,400 miles in.
Okay. So he was coming to do a section near me. I live in Pennsylvania, right near Pine Grove Furnace State Park, just a half a mile from the AT. And so I transported George and his buddy Larry to Duncannon so that they could hike a section. And I was like, okay, George, now we're buddies. And I heard you go to the canyon. How about I come next time? And I went that year. We're pretty nervous. And my Spanish was very minimal back then. A lot of family members were concerned about safety issues, but like George said, like never feel unsafe with our team down there. And I've gone now every time that George has gone back, I've gone with him. So I've gone down 6 times, and I fell in love with the experience. Even more so now that I can understand Spanish much better. Getting to talk and sit with a Rarámuri, and just talk about their lives and what they're interested in and what their daily lives look like, and just connecting with them and that wild. It's like just a wild spirit down there. Like there's no traffic, there's no phones ringing. The schedule is the schedule of nature. Like you wake up when the sun comes up and things settle down when the sun goes down. You're on natural schedule, and it's just like kind of connecting with that wildness and with the people who live naturally in that wildness has been like the best.
So if I hear correctly, the way that you're describing it is, and aside from the podcasting, adventure racing, I worked with children for a lot of years, and I worked in a lot of different educational settings. And one thing we learned really early on, I worked in very, very, very economically challenged areas with children who had life experiences that were just very, very difficult. And this was the early 90s. This was back when the Bronx was really the Wild West. And one thing that really was driven home to us in this school that I worked in, and I worked in the most wonderful all-boys Catholic high school called St. Raymond's High School for boys in the Bronx and the East Bronx, and a great place to start my teaching career. And what they drove home the point was the fact that you're not here to save anybody. Like cut that out. Like you're not here. Like you're not a rescuer here. Your job is to help. And your job is to put aside judgment, and your job is merely to be of service to these children who need a lot. And when I say this out loud, all 5 of you started nodding at the same time. It sounds like that is it feels like that's a core principle of your work, right? You're not viewing the local population as people who need you to rescue them, but rather you're going down there to care for them. Am I capturing that correctly?
Absolutely.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
And so therefore therefore you accompany them, right? And that's a very common principle in social justice teachings, is that you don't pull, you don't push, but you walk alongside. And it sounds like that's what you're doing down there. When all 5 of you talked about your experience, you talked about this this sense down there of a combination of it being, I'm going to say the word placid, it might not be the right word to use, but I'm trying, and a wild sort of a place. And clearly it's touched all 5 of you in pretty much a similar sort of way. when you got involved in the work, the experience that you thought you were going to have versus the one you had, someone come on and tell us, what was the difference there? What was the delta between the two? The way you thought it was going to be and the way it was?
I was 100% terrified at first. It was interesting for me because I'd been a stay-at-home mom for many, let's see how many years that was, like 10, at least 10 years before I went down. And it was my first trip to do something on my own without family. And to go someplace that wild, I was terrified. And then when I think about my trip back out of Mexico, that long drive back to the border, and I was sobbing almost the whole time, like just thinking about how terrified I was to go, but then how terrified I was to leave at the end. So it was
say more about that.
Yeah, just from my perspective as a stay-at-home mom, which was an interesting perspective, I think. Mothers give, right? So my husband and I managed to train for ultras at the same time while we had small children. That boggles my mind that we were able to do that, but I still didn't do a lot of things just for myself. And this was like a just gen adventure. But it ended up being like I think a lot of people feel this way. We kind of find a piece of yourself that you didn't know you were missing. And I think that's a lot of why a lot of us seek out hard, long adventures in the woods, because there's something kind of primal and wild that we're missing about ourselves. And I think I found that down there. And then I found people that like live in that natural state. They don't need all the things that we think we need. I'm sure they could do with more like food security and medical security. But yeah, so that sort of encapsulates sort of like what I mean, like just finding a little extra piece of yourself, like what makes us human. And one more thing, and it was so clear to me, and it had never been more clear in my life until I went to the canyon, that the planet is very small, and we need each other. Like all people need each other, and we're all we have for each other. And if we're not here for each other, then what are we doing? That was so crystal clear to me in every cell of my body when I went down there and just experienced that with the people.
Thank you. Chris, what were you going to say?
Well, so I've done many humanitarian projects, being a doctor and through the military and with NGOs and church groups. And what I was expecting was one of the normal, experiences where you go, there's a big organization, everything's set up, and they kind of herd the people through, treat it more, American clinic style, and kind of just treat the patients, the people, as a commodity. Like, I'm down here to, help people, I did air quotes, while at the same time I get to feel good about myself. But really, they weren't focused on the people. They're focused on, I'm just going to, check a box and head back. And it's still good. I mean, you deliver good medicine that way too, but the focus is wrong. I got down there and it was not assembly line medicine. It was very personal. It was very up close. You really get to meet them. You really get to see, okay, they're really not asking for much. They just want to be able to, go about their day without a little bit of a back pain, or, they got a tooth infection, or, whatever. And if we weren't there, they wouldn't complain about it and they'd keep on going. And so it was very nice to actually sit down and have time with patients, even though I didn't speak Spanish or Rarámuri, which was great. So it's an English to Spanish, Spanish to Rarámuri, back and forth, telephone game, trying to figure out what's going on. But you get to know them and you get to actually make a difference in their life. And you miss having that as an American doctor a lot of times. And so I saw people that had hard lives by choice, but happy, coming just to ask for a little bit of help, and us having the ability to help them on a personal level without any judgment, not trying to change their culture and saying, oh, if you change your lifestyle or this. No, they come with the problem. We give our advice and try and help them, and they go on their way. And it was very satisfying.
Gary, George, and Anna, do you want to add to that?
So I'm from Chihuahua, and I grew up with Rarámuris. Like every summer, we would go to the ranch, and my mom would never see me because I would be in the canyon and just having fun with them. So for me, it's just coming home. It's home. Like I'm just coming home to something that I know. Like it's
So it sounds like your role on it is that you're a strong bridge. You're a connector between the fact that you work between the two cultures, or it's a culture going to help and the culture that's living there.
Yes.
And you're able to smooth that. You help make it easy for people to go and take part and help people.
In a way, yes. Because I mean, so when I met George, he was in huaraches, that's what they wear. So when I saw him and I'm like, why are you wearing huaraches? I know them. I know these people.
Those are the shoes.
Those are the shoes.
The shoes, the sandals,
in Virginia,
the shoes.
In a place where nobody wears huaraches. Even his license plate, he was showing it to us, says Korima.
Wait. I apologize. You saw him wearing those. Where was he wearing them? Like, where was he?
In Virginia. In Virginia, he was wearing his huaraches. I'm like, what? What's going on?
That's quite a nice coincidence to see that and to realize that he's connected to that culture like that. And so that actually helped break down that barrier a bit right there.
Right, exactly. Yes.
George.
And when you see patients there, they have a different paradigm of healthcare. Mm-hmm. With the Rarámuri, health is a community issue. Now, being a doctor in the U.S., it's always one doctor in one room with one patient, secrecy, HIPAA regulations.
Oh.
I go to the canyon, and sometimes we would just hold our clinic on a big rock in the middle of a cornfield. And there would be people, and you would ask someone, well, what's wrong? And the patient wouldn't answer. Someone in the crowd around would say, she's had a stomach ache for 3 days. And I'd say, well, what makes it worse? And they say, when she eats tortillas, she's in pain. You know, it's a whole community thing. And the other thing that was always kind of fascinating is shamans are kind of the local health provider. And a shaman has to be very skilled at dreams and talking to the afterworld and the other spirit world. And I was talking with Tomas and Brenda after our trip, and I'd said, I would be really honored to meet the local shaman down there, you know, just to go and, you know, shake his hand. And, you know, he does in his culture what I do in mine. And they laughed and said, oh, Jorge, every time you're here, he comes and sees you as a patient. You know, I think he's just kind of checking out the competition.
He's like trying to fool you, trying to baffle you.
Yeah, try to fool me. Yeah. Doctor
great.
To the shamans. Yeah.
That's good. Sherry, what do you think?
When the first time I went to the canyon was about 13, 14 years ago. I was at an adventure race. I see Doc at every race. I was racing a lot then, as well as still. And I had just read Born to Run, loved it. And when Doc told me, I'm leaving for Copper Canyon next week. I'm like, Copper Canyon, like Born to Run Copper Canyon? And he said, yep. I said, oh man, I'd really love to go. What do I said, I am a respiratory therapist. I could help. I'll carry boxes. I'll shovel. What do I need to do? And he said, you're in. So lo and behold, I end up in El Paso, Texas is where we all meet. And we get picked up by Tomas and Brenda and a group of other interesting folks. And we get driven to the border, and we cross the border. And then we have a 2-day trip down into Copper Canyon with a stop at a place called Rio Chico, which is part of the ministry as well. Mm-hmm. And we stay the night there. That's where we collect our medications and we sort them, and we finish the drive then with stopping and getting food for the Tarahumara, as well as maybe bringing down 16 goats, or we just brought down 2 huge pigs in the back of a U-Haul. It was like a little U-Haul. It was pretty wild. And the drive down is long. It gets very beautiful. And once you're in there, you hit the top of the canyon. We have to drive down into Wakaibo, which is where the school is and the clinic. And first time I went into the canyon, I was with Anna, and I did not want to drive down. I walked. I hiked down at probably midnight with Anna into the canyon because I was too afraid to be in the car, because there are no roads, Brian. None. It's just rock that you're driving on. They're driving these old, Suburbans. So, and I fell in love. I went down there. It was an adventure like nothing else I've ever done. We had to hike into areas and led by locals with burros and boxes of medication on the burros. We had to cross raging rivers. It was so cool. And then we got to take care of these wonderful people. And like I said before, they're shy, they're very quiet, very, very modest, but there is a gratitude if they do look you in the eye, which does happen on occasion. It's the most, looking into those eyes, those big dark eyes, is the most amazing thing. And just to be able, to experience that, it's a privilege. So, yep. So I've gone back and I've told you about it. I think we discussed it in races. And this year for me, as for a few of us, we've had some medical issues and I wasn't sure I could go. And when Doc asked me again, I said, and here I am going into a remote area. Maybe it wasn't such a great idea. It healed me in a lot of ways. So
one of the up and coming races that's occurring around in the Adventure Racing World Series is a race called La Ruta Madre by Javier Barreda, and it's a very, very popular race, but it struggles because it's being held in Mexico, right? And then there's that cultural bias, that lean against Mexican culture, things like that. And Jen, you mentioned this before when you talk about the nervousness about going down there and the idea of feeling safe and not feeling safe and all of that. I always like, and Javier did this when he was on the show, and I invite everyone who wants to come on now to talk about it, to push back against the narrative that Mexico is it different from the popular perceptions we're seeing in the media. And it sounds to me like it is the way that you're talking about it, the way that you travel, the way you're with people. Anna, what do you want to say about that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit of a touchy subject because I'm Mexican. I've lived that. Organized crime, cartels all my life. It's completely safe. If you're in that world, that's not where you want to be. If you're in the organized crime, if you are, that's not where you want to go. But if you're not into that, we've been going there. What George has said, he's been going there for 25 years.
27.
Yeah.
And there was a time back when Odyssey was active where we actually thought, would we ever consider holding an adventure race in Copper Canyon? I was kind of against the idea because the Tarahumara are very reclusive people. They don't like strangers, and you bring a couple hundred Westerners spread out, lost. It's just not fair to the people. It's we'd be taking advantage of them. It'd be a hell of a race, but it would be. But it wouldn't be good for their culture because unless they know you and you have their trust, they want nothing to do with the outside world because they have been screwed over every time they've interacted with Western culture, and they're resistant. But Tomas has gained their trust and their friendship now for decades, and we're accepted because Tomas is accepted.
Yeah, and Chris kind of referenced this too when he talked about the idea of the clinical medicine NGO model, is that sometimes we run the risk of turning people into objects, right? And as a result of that, we end up people that we want to help, we end up dehumanizing them. So you have to be careful, right? Because that's sometimes that's a very weird byproduct of very, very good intentions. Right. And you see that very often. And Anna, to your point about the cartels in Mexico and all of that, I'm as someone who's worked in areas that would be considered dangerous. There's two thoughts that I have. One is the idea is that for the most part, you really have to kind of go looking for it to come to you. Right. Correct. That the usual civilian is left alone. And on top of that, when you're doing the work that you're doing, people who are bad actors, realize the value that you're bringing to their communities, and they leave you alone. Like there's no benefit. They know that you're there to help, and as a result, they don't see you as anything but someone who's there doing the right thing. And I had that experience ages ago with the work that I did. That I would go to areas that would just be completely upside down, but because I was there for the proper reasons, those elements who might have had bad intentions gave a wide berth because they knew I was there to help people, and as a result, we all got along just fine. So I agree with that.
Exactly the same scenario here.
Back about 10, 12 years ago, we were driving into some remote villages, and we had 3 trucks with food and pig and livestock, and one of the trucks was lagging behind, was miles behind. And they came around a turn, and 3 guys with automatic weapons came out of the underbrush and said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, we're with Pastor Tomas. They put their guns down, smiled, and waved him on through.
Yeah.
You're right. We're a benefit to the people, and I think if they ever did anything with Tomas, they would probably have an Indian uprising on their hands.
Right. There's an understanding there. Sherry, you talked about having to go down into the canyon and the cars and all that. And so the adventure racer me wants to ask is, how physically rigorous is the work? Like, what kind of shape do you have to be in to be able to do it effectively?
It can be done by someone. You can get driven into some places. If you elect to hike down into the canyon, that is a bit, and hike down and hike across, because we hiked to another village called Teban. It's a village of 2 houses, but that's where a lot of the Tarahumara come. That's like our final day when we clinic, and it's rigorous and but very doable, and it's a sense of adventure. And you have to remember, food is a little limited. You're going to be eating a lot of tortillas, a lot of beans, and maybe a little bit of chicken. And there's the food. You have to be very, very broad about what you're going to eat. A lot of, some cheese. There's not a lot. Everything they have, they share. And you just have to be very open-minded. You may be sleeping on the floor. You might be sharing a bed with 3 or 4 other girls from the church. It's like doing an adventure race.
Well, it sounds like you're describing a race, right? You're eating food at different weird hours, sleeping wherever you kind of put your head down and off you go.
Yeah.
And I think too, and going back to the idea behind the podcast, is that there's the adventure race ethic. It sounds like it is transferred really nicely here, and also too the ultra running ethic, too, right? That clearly doing these hard things. It's one thing to do a hard thing recreationally and have a good time doing it, but taking that skill set and applying it over to this kind of work is it's a very obvious. The crossover, the Venn diagram is very, very clear.
No, it felt completely. I mean, I never felt unsafe because of the way that we go into the canyon, and what we're doing is I've always felt safe. Even when we drove through Juarez and all that, I was like, I wanted to get out and hang out and go eat some good food.
Making friends.
I think Mexico is one of my, I'd move there in a heartbeat. I love it. And 2 years now doing my Duolingo. I'm very excited because I think we did a race last year. You were worried about breaking your streak. I was breaking. Oh yeah. I was like, Brian, I'm going to break my streak.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember being like day 3 and you're crying about your streak and I'm crying about my feet. Anna, what do you want to say?
That yes, you do have to be in shape. Like you do. I'm the one that always struggles. So I think 2 years ago, when we went across to Tejaban, it took me I think it was 7 hours. And I was going along. She was pregnant. I think she was seven months pregnant, and she beat me by 5 hours. So yes, you do have to be in shape. Right. But they do that trip that Sherry was talking about, 2 hours or less. I mean, they They fly through.
Well, it's built into it's in their DNA, right? They've been doing it for generations. They've been doing it for so long.
I mean, she was 7 months pregnant and she just ran up that canyon.
Yeah. I did a race one time in Philadelphia, the Broad Street Run, and I got passed at the finish by a woman pushing a stroller. That one hurt.
I remember I think it was the first year that I went. We walked to Hebron one day, and then the next day we walked over to Napuchi. And on the way back, we did a clinic there. And on the way back, at the time I was in actually really good ultra running shape. I had just done an ultra weeks before I went. And I was feeling pretty good about myself and my shape. And we dropped down off this path, and then we're climbing up this bald rock the other side, and grandmothers carrying their grandchildren while wearing jelly shoes were flying by me. And I was like, I'm humbled. I'm definitely humbled.
They're kind of like, we're here to help you.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you need anything? Would you like to hop on?
No, we got this wrong. I'm here to help you. No, trust us. We know who needs help here, and it's not us.
It's the gringa.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I always used to take a certain little bit of sadistic pride in watching people 30, 40 years younger than me struggle up the wall of that canyon. But I'm 73, and I must admit, this last year, it really kicked my butt. I don't know how many more of those climbs I have left at my age, but it's not easy. The person who was the Tarahumara running champion before Arnulfo, in Born to Run, it's Arnulfo. The person who was the tribal champion before Arnulfo has been my patient for many years down there, and. It was, and just to meet him, and I asked him if he drank any tesguino, which is the corn beer during the race. He says, no, not until after the race. And I asked him, what did he eat? And he was just eating corn tortillas and drinking water. And it was it was about a 10-mile loop, 22 kilometers. And how their races are, it's last person standing. Everyone else has quit. You're still going out for the next loop, and you're the winner. So I asked him, how many loops did he do? And he said, it was 21. So that was 210 miles at altitude on corn tortillas and water. And, that's, what kind of aches and pains do you have? What can I do? Can I get your children some vitamins? It was... It's kind of a magical moment.
So what was your reaction when Born to Run came out, right? So here's a culture that you've known intimately for a lot of years, and this book shows up, and all of a sudden it's a bestseller.
Yeah, I've been going for about 10 years, because before Born to Run came out in 2009, I do believe, and I've been going for at least 10 years. I never really knew they were runners. I just knew they were people that walked every place real quickly. I think it's got a lot of popular press, and I can see the village of Creel, which is the closest town of any size to the canyon, has really just expanded in size just because of tourism and whatnot. But I think to the Tarahumara down deep in the canyon, it hasn't really made a difference. They're not aware of any of that. And one thing that I've always kind of admired about the Tarahumara, they live on the corn they grow, and live by the sunlight in the season. If civilization as we know it ended, meaning no more petroleum, no more internet, no more electricity, it really wouldn't make a whole lot of difference in their lifestyle. If anything, they would have less pressure on them from the outside world. And that's one thing which I really kind of admire about them.
Well, isn't that part of the challenges there are parts of the world that are, I'm going to use unspoiled, right? That people live a certain way. You see them in the Amazons, with the tribes that are there, the indigenous tribes. And when Born to Run came out, I remember reading, and it was very, very popular at the time, and we all enjoyed it. But I remember it feeling like here you are now, you have this culture that is kind of frozen in time, and happily so. And now all of a sudden there's this New York Times bestseller that runs the risk of spoiling what they represent, right? And I'm glad to hear that really hasn't come alive, right? There's that one town that is a bit more popular because Copper Canyon tours, people want to run down there. But it sounds like the work that you do, that those populations remain unspoiled.
Yeah, I think where we go, there are no tourists. You would get hopelessly lost. There's no trail markings. There's no signs on the road. There's just nothing of civilization other than old logging roads that we go on. And now the road goes down to the school, but that's a fairly recent thing in the last 6 or 8 years. That used to be an all day hike with the burros to get to these villages.
There's no doubt in my mind that the listenership of the Dark Zone their ears are going to perk up having this conversation, right? Because for the adventure racers, overwhelmingly, we're on this call tour. They tend to be they're very collectivist. They take care of each other. They love the teamwork part of it. There will be high interest for the work that you're doing in our listenership. And I'll put all the links to your work in the show notes for the listeners can go find it there. But what can somebody do from their vantage point right now if they can't go into the canyon, but they want to help out? What action can they take? How can they donate? How can they advocate? What can they do to help your work?
They could definitely go into our website. I mean, it gives them a little bit of, we have some pictures that kind of sort of puts it in a picture of what we are talking about right now. They could definitely donate. They don't have to be in the canyon to help out. And we're going to try to put more information, year by year to see how the progress is happening with the clinic. There's definitely, like, if somebody is really interested, we definitely need volunteers. Yep. Like, if somebody really has the heart and wants to go see the canyon, there's a possibility.
No, Chris, what's that about the workers? I heard you say something there.
No, so yeah, I mean, we need volunteers. I mean, we obviously need money to buy medicine and equipment and, get the clinic, fully functional. But, volunteers are welcome and it's an opportunity of a lifetime, but it is a privilege. So don't volunteer just to say I went down to Copper Canyon and check a box. I mean, you're going to work. It's going to be long days. It's going to be very rewarding, but it is going to be work. So
what's the total length of time for a usual visit from leaving El Paso to getting back to El Paso? How long are you usually gone for?
Usually a week. After that, I'm not sure the current Mexico state policy, but it was a week and then you need a visa. So we try and plan it for a week, down, back, take care of everybody, and then get back across before we get in trouble.
Gotcha. Yeah, because you're a tourist for that point, right? You have 7 days tourism, and after that, you got to apply and put that in there. Is there any interaction with the Mexican government? Do they take actions down there? Do they leave the canyon alone? Is there any intersection there with the civil authorities?
There's some interaction. Vaccines are brought by the Mexican government because we can't take them because of the refrigeration part. So they do get vaccinated from the Mexican government side. There's food, sometimes not as consistent as our group. Our group goes about once a month.
So once a month, El Paso
even
into the
twice.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. And so what is your so wrap some numbers around that? How many total volunteers do you have over the course of that time?
Tomas distributes us differently. Like our group, our United States kind of sort of group of doctors, we've been consistent in the past 5 years for November. But he definitely takes other groups.
Well, sure, because there's more people who want to help, right? So he probably platoons them and rotates them through.
He does.
And November is your time to do it, but other groups go around the year because you don't have the master capacity to go on a monthly basis. I mean, it's a big trip for everybody coming from the States, but other groups fill in for that.
Oh yeah. He'll take groups from Canada, and then there's other 2 docs that he works with, and then he'll take them. They won't do the hikes like we do, but he'll also rotate. And then himself, he'll just go himself and do food trips.
I think, wasn't there about 12, 13 of us total on the last trip that we went on?
It was us, and then a support group from
and then
them.
The church,
Also, but through Korima Health, initiative, we do want to go down to the canyon more and be more available, and do some training down there for the people. So, we're going to have some equipment like an EKG, that they can do an EKG and they can go
Correct.
into the doc's phone. They can read it, which will be huge, because it's all, Bluetooth. So that's the whole basis of this, is we want to be more present and more available and help out more.
Well, of course, because you found a model that works effectively, but it takes people, it takes capital, it takes all those resources to wrap around that. Right.
That's why we're starting this not-for-profit, and we're rolling with it because...
Right. The building is there for the clinic, but we definitely need, like I said, medications, beds, equipment. It is our turn to step up and bring all that together.
Got it. Because you've seen the need, and obviously there's ways that you want to close those gaps. And like good ultra runners and adventure racers, you're very initiative driven. You're very thoughtful, and you're going to put that together. You're going to get teamwork going and make all of that happen.
Correct.
And I might say this, that things are much better than they were back during the famine in the late 90s. But things still have a long way to go. A couple years ago, they sent people out in the region where we go, and despite all the food relief and the vaccinations and the clinics and whatever, they asked the people, well, how many children do you have and how many are alive? And just as of a couple years ago, if you were a Tarahumara, child born in Copper Canyon, you have a 50-50 chance of making it alive to your 10th birthday. 50% of children will die before they reach the age of 10. Can you imagine that if we had that here in the States? I mean, that's just obscene.
Yeah.
That, they're so close to our border, and yet this is happening. So while we try, there's still a whole lot more that needs done.
Is there anything that I haven't asked or we haven't spoken about that you want to highlight about the work that you're doing? I don't want to leave anything unsaid before we finish up.
I think, well, also we did touch on this briefly, but one of our, long-term goals is medical education. Now they, like George described, they do have local medicine, they're shaman. It's a very deep, rich medical culture, but like basic wound care and dental care, these are things that they could learn, and some of them might just relearn what they already used to know. But we want to help them take care of themselves, right? You got to feed the community to take care of themselves, not just us saving, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a big piece of what we want to do.
Well, you're not doing them a favor if the only time they have access to those resources is when you're present, right? You want them to be able to take that when you're absent, that they could say to themselves, well, they're not here, but this is what we've been taught how to do, and that's how we take care of ourselves.
I'd like to say something about the dental. If you go on the rim of the canyon and the villages that have some Western things where they get access to sugary drinks and Coca-Cola, they have just horrible teeth. You go deep into the canyon, which is more untouched, and they're living on the corn tortillas that they grew and, the vegetables. Some of those old folks have just beautiful teeth, and they've never seen a dentist in their lifetime. And it's, and you see the children and they clamor for the soft drinks and the candy bars, but, it's just, it's best to try to stay away from that and let the Tarahumara be the Tarahumara and eat their traditional foods, because Western food is poison to them.
Right, and because that's the case, there's such an interesting conversation to be had about this, and that was minute 55. I'm bringing this up, right? But the question is who's who's the uncivilized and who's the civilized? Right. You, as everyone nods when I say that, thank God. But the idea, who's really doing right and who's doing it wrong. Right. And, sometimes we think we're so star-spangled awesome with our early onset diabetes, our bad teeth, and the fact that we have mortality rates that are on the way down. And then you come across a community like you're working with. And while there's a lot of challenges, they've also avoided a lot of the things that are hurting us in our world.
And the name Korima, what that is, it's a concept in Tarahumara culture. Well, let's say if you and I are both hungry and you've got 2 slices of bread, you're going to automatically give me one of those 2 slices. I don't have to ask for it, and you fully expect to give it because next time when we're both hungry and I'm the one with 2 slices of bread, I'm going to give one to you. So the Karima talks about that spirit of caring and sharing for other people in your community. It's it's a real major concept because probably the worst sin you can commit as a Tarahumara is greed. To hoard more than you need. That's just abhorrent to their culture.
There's a whole thought line there, right? Rebecca Solnit wrote a book called A Paradise Born in Hell. And the gist of that book, it's a wonderful book, is basically people are at their best when things are at their worst. Right. And she talks about Katrina and 9/11 and how when our collective safety is challenged, we put aside all those things that get in the way of us being who we are. And we move forward as a people. Right. And what you're saying there is that you're seeing that up close in a culture that still does that to this day. They realize that their collective survival is dependent upon each other.
Yeah. And that's something
because
that's
they have
absent
to share
here.
or they won't survive.
Yeah. And I think that really touches upon a large challenges that we're having today, right? We've forgotten that we are dependent upon each other for our collective survival. We see the other person because we don't care if they live or die because we're going to be just fine, right? That's the attitude that's coming out there. Mm-hmm. And then you do come across these cultures that are holding on to that because they realize that that's what they have to do, that their sense of interdependence is very, very strong.
There's this line that you hear it all over the place. That's not my problem. Right. And Korima, if you have a problem, I have a problem. Like it's community. Like we all depend on each other.
So it sounds like for everyone who's involved here is that when you intersect with that, coming from our culture to their culture, that intersection is very powerful. And to see it alive and see it living itself that way. And to your point, going home is hard because you realize that you're leaving a place that is very often aspiring to living where other people really should be living.
Right. But we get to bring that back with us and hopefully share it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the point, right? The point is that now that you've been exposed to that, you carry that into your own life, and therefore you who saved who, right? That's always the joke, right? In reality, the person who benefited the most is not them; it's us as a result of it. Wonderful, no, so good, such good work, and I'm going to include all of this in the show notes. So those who are listening out there in the Dark Zone Adventure Racers, you love a good challenge, you love taking care of people, so we encourage everybody to take a good look at the website. Korima Health Initiative, Korima healthinitiative.com. And we're going to circle back. And I guarantee you that there will be volunteers that will spring from this episode, that there's adventure racers out there that will completely respond to this. Because they want to hang out with Shari. That's a whole other story.
Okay.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't?
All right, folks. Thank you. Have a good evening. There you have it, folks. Another episode of The Dark Zone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for giving KHI your time and attention. Be sure to check out those show notes for information about their work and check it out. Donate, give, volunteer, help others. It's the AR way, and we are so happy to bring it to you. All the best. And remember, if you keep talking, wait a minute. Remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking. We're allowed to talk too. Thanks for being here and be safe.